The ruined outpost stood in eerie silence, its structure half consumed by time and neglect. The once proud insignia of the Zilithian dynasty was barely visible beneath the grime and weathering of years. It was an abandoned relic on a forgotten moon, a place where the powerful buried their mistakes. Dr. Caden Lowell stepped cautiously through the crumbling corridors, his boots crunching over scattered debris. He had followed rumors. Whispers passed among smugglers and exiled traders, tales of a discarded royal, a woman exiled for something worse than treason. Imperfection. He had heard of Prince Soren, heir to the Zilithian throne, a ruler so obsessed with perfection that even his own bloodline was not exempt from its demands. His wife, a queen once revered, had vanished overnight. The official records claimed she had taken ill and passed away, but the rumors told a different story. One of exile, of abandonment, of a woman left to die because she was no longer beautiful. Caden had seen many things in his years as a medic: war wounds, scars left by cruelty, by neglect, by the arrogance of the powerful. But something about this story had gnawed at him, something he could not ignore. He turned a corner and entered what remained of the outpost's infirmary. The air was stale, heavy with dust, and the faint scent of old antiseptic. And there, lying against a tattered cot in the dim light, was her, Valara. She was still, barely breathing, her once regal robes reduced to worn fabric draped over her frail form. Her face, once known for its elegance across the empire, was now marred with scars that traced down her cheek and neck, disappearing beneath the fabric. Scars that had cost her everything. Her golden eyes flickered open, dull with exhaustion, but sharp with awareness. She had heard him approach. Caden knelt beside her, carefully setting his medical bag down. "You're Valara," he said, though it wasn't a question. Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "What does it matter?" He studied her, the defiance still lingering in her expression despite her condition. She had not given up. "I'm a medic," he said simply, "and you need help." A slow breath left her lips, something bitter curling at the edges. "Help," she echoed, as if the word itself were a cruel joke. "Where was help when he left me here?" Caden didn't answer. He didn't have to. They both knew the answer. She had been abandoned, and he was the first person in years who had come for her. Valara did not resist as Caden worked, but she did not welcome it either. She sat stiffly as he examined her, her golden eyes fixed somewhere beyond the crumbling walls, as if she were still trapped in the moment she had been left here. Her injuries were severe, but not fresh. Some wounds had been poorly treated, the kind that were left to heal on their own because there was no other option. He recognized the signs of malnutrition, dehydration, but it was her silence that concerned him the most. Caden moved carefully, wrapping fresh bandages over an older wound on her shoulder. "How long have you been here?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. Valara's lips twitched, but it was not a smile. Long enough to know that no one was coming. His hand stilled for a brief second before continuing his work. "Then why are you still alive?" At that, she did smile, but it was something hollow, edged with something sharp. "Because I refused to let him have the satisfaction of knowing he succeeded." Caden exhaled through his nose, his respect for her growing. She had been discarded, left to fade, and yet she had endured. He applied a salve to one of the deeper scars along her arm, the cool sensation making her flinch slightly. It was the first physical reaction she had shown since he had begun treating her. He noted it, but said nothing. She broke the silence instead. "Why are you here, human?" Her voice held no accusation, only curiosity, perhaps even disbelief. Caden didn't look up from his work, because someone should be. She let out a quiet laugh, dry and humorless. "And you believe that someone is you?" His gaze met hers then, steady and unwavering. "I believe that no one deserves to be left behind." Valara held his gaze for a moment longer, as if searching for something in his expression, something she had not seen in years. She did not find pity. She did not find revulsion. She found a man who refused to look away. For the first time since she had woken to a world where she was no longer a queen, she did not feel invisible. The air inside the outpost was heavy with dust and the lingering scent of decay. Caden worked silently, his hands moving with practiced precision as he finished tending to Valara's wounds. Despite the passage of time, despite the neglect, her body had fought to heal itself, refusing to surrender. She had survived longer than any royal exile was meant to, and that alone told him something about the woman sitting before him. She did not flinch under his touch, nor did she offer gratitude. There was only the quiet, steady weight of her gaze, as though she were waiting for him to ask the question everyone else must have asked before abandoning her. "Why are you still alive?" But he already knew the answer. He sat back, exhaling slowly as he packed up the medical kit. "You'll need more than just treatment," he said finally. "You need food, rest, a safe place to recover." Valara scoffed, shifting slightly on the cot. Even weakened, there was something unyielding about her. "And where do you suggest I find such a place? You think my husband will welcome me back into his palace? That the Empire will suddenly forget why they threw me away?" Caden leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees as he met her gaze. "No," he said evenly. "I think you don't belong here, rotting away in a ruin while the rest of the galaxy moves on without you." Her expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her golden eyes, something unreadable. "I survived because I refused to let Soren decide my fate," she said, her voice quieter now. "But survival is not the same as living." Caden didn't hesitate. "Then let's change that." Valara tilted her head slightly, studying him. "And what do you expect in return? A queen's gratitude? A favor from the royal court?" He smirked, shaking his head. "I don't expect anything." He gestured to the outpost around them, the crumbling walls, the emptiness. "But I know this isn't where you want to die." Silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, Valara stood. Her legs trembled from disuse, but she did not fall. She did not ask for help. She straightened her shoulders, ignoring the way her body protested the movement, and took a single step forward. Caden watched her carefully, ready to catch her if she collapsed. But she didn't. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with something new in her eyes. "Resolve." "I'll go with you," she said. "But not because I need saving." Caden nodded. "I wouldn't have offered if you did." Valara let out a slow breath, steadying herself. The weight of the past still clung to her, the pain of betrayal, the scars both seen and unseen. But as she followed him out of the ruined outpost, stepping beyond the walls that had caged her for too long, she felt something she had not felt in years. Possibility. For the first time since she had been left to die, the future was hers to decide. The Nomad waited on the outskirts of the outpost, its sleek silver hull reflecting the faint light of the system's dying sun. It wasn't a grand vessel, not the kind of ship Valara had once traveled in as a queen, but it was free. It did not belong to the empire that had cast her out. It did not carry the weight of royal expectations or the cold indifference of a husband who had once called her wife. She hesitated at the base of the boarding ramp. Caden turned, watching her with quiet patience. He didn't rush her, didn't try to convince her. He had already given her the choice. Now, it was hers to take. Valara inhaled slowly. For years, she had survived in isolation, believing she had been left with nothing. Now, standing before a ship that could take her anywhere, the realization settled deep into her bones. She was free. No more court politics. No more expectations of beauty or perfection. No more waiting for someone to remember she had once been worth something. Her worth was hers to define. She lifted her chin and stepped forward. Caden smiled slightly but said nothing as she boarded the ship. The door sealed behind them with a quiet hiss, and in the next breath, the engines rumbled to life. Valara settled into one of the seats in the small passenger bay, watching as the barren landscape of the moon disappeared beneath them. The ship trembled slightly as it broke through the atmosphere, the pull of gravity fading into weightlessness. Caden sat across from her, tapping coordinates into the console. "There's a neutral trade station not far from here," he said. "We'll stop there first, get supplies, rest, figure out our next move." Valara studied him. And after that, he met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "That's up to you." She let the words settle in, let herself sit with the terrifying and exhilarating truth of them. For the first time in her life, she had no title, no throne, no chains. She had only herself, and for the first time, that was enough. The Nomad soared through the vast blackness of space, heading toward Haven's Reach, a neutral trade station that straddled the fragile peace between empires. It was a place for smugglers, refugees, and those who did not belong anywhere else. Valara sat by the viewport, watching the distant lights of the station grow brighter with each passing moment. The silence between her and Caden was not uncomfortable, but it was heavy, filled with the weight of what she had left behind and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. He had given her no promises, no assurances of a future that would be easy or fair. And yet, as she looked upon the man who had pulled her from exile, she realized he had given her something far more valuable: a choice. As the nomad docked, Caden glanced at her. "We'll need supplies, if you'd rather stay on the ship." "I'm not hiding," she interrupted, her voice firmer than she expected. Caden's lips twitched into something close to a smirk. "Didn't think you would." She followed him down the ramp, her movements steady despite the lingering ache in her muscles. The air of the trade station was thick with the scent of fuel, metal, and something faintly spiced. Voices filled the docking bay, a mix of different species conducting their business, exchanging information, or simply watching for an opportunity. It was the last group that caught Valara's attention. Eyes followed her as she stepped into the crowded walkways, not because of her scars, but because of who she had been. The Zilithian name still carried weight, even here. A whisper passed through the crowd, carried on hushed voices. Valara. The queen who had been discarded. The woman who was supposed to be dead. She did not flinch. She did not lower her gaze. She walked forward. Caden led the way to a merchant stall lined with medical supplies, bartering efficiently as Valara stood beside him. She could feel the whispers growing, the questions in their eyes. And then someone spoke. "I don't believe it." A tall Zilithian male stepped forward from the crowd, his silver robes marking him as a noble of the empire. His golden eyes, so much like her own, narrowed as he studied her, disbelief warring with recognition. "You should not be here," he said. Valara lifted her chin, her voice cold and unshaken. "And yet here I stand." The noble exhaled, his expression shifting into something sharp, something calculating. "The Empire believes you are dead. If they learn otherwise, they will have to face the truth," she interrupted, taking a step closer. "And you will have to decide whether you fear it." For a long moment, the noble held her gaze. Then, without another word, he turned and disappeared into the crowd. Caden exhaled, shaking his head. "Well, that was subtle." Valara smirked, the smallest flicker of amusement in her expression. "They were always going to notice. Now, at least, they'll know I do not fear them." Caden watched her, something unreadable in his gaze. "You never did you?" Valara looked past him toward the station beyond. For the first time, she realized she didn't need to answer. He already knew. They left the trade market behind, winding through the corridors of the station toward the quieter districts. Caden had booked a room in a secure inn, away from prying eyes, but Valara knew it would only buy them so much time. Her presence on Haven's Reach had not gone unnoticed. The message came before they had even reached their quarters. A flickering hologram appeared before them, the figure of a Zilithian emissary standing tall in the dim corridor. His deep blue robes bore the royal insignia, his face carved from stone, but it was his words that sent a chill through Valara's spine. "By order of Prince Soren, you are to be taken into imperial custody." Caden moved before she could react, stepping in front of her with a calm that was almost unnerving. "She's not under his authority anymore." The emissary barely acknowledged him. His gaze remained fixed on Valara, as if she were still bound to the throne that had abandoned her. "You do not belong here," he said. "Return willingly, and perhaps the prince will show mercy." Valara's fingers curled into fists. Mercy. The word tasted like poison. "Tell Soren he should choose his words more carefully," she said, her voice low, steady. "I do not need his mercy. I never did." The emissary's expression did not change, but something in his posture did. A flicker of uncertainty. Valara stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "You thought I would die on that moon," she continued, her golden eyes burning. "You thought I would fade away, forgotten and broken. But I am still here, and you will not take me back as if I am something to be reclaimed." The emissary's jaw tightened. "You would challenge the Empire?" Valara smiled, slow and sharp. "No," she said. "I would make them regret me." The hologram flickered out. Caden let out a breath, shaking his head. "That was bold." Valara turned to him, her gaze unwavering. "That was necessary." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Then we better make sure you're ready for whatever comes next." Valara exhaled slowly. She knew Soren would not let this go. The prince had expected her to die quietly, to vanish into history as an unfortunate stain upon his legacy. But now, the galaxy would know the truth. She had survived. And she was not done yet. The artificial sunrise cast a pale golden glow over Haven's Reach, painting its rusted metal corridors with soft light. The trade station never truly slept. But there were moments, just before the market stalls opened, just before the air filled with the calls of merchants and the hum of starships, where it felt like the universe itself paused. Valara stood at the balcony of their rented quarters, looking down at the shifting crowd below. She could still hear the emissary's words echoing in her mind. Return willingly, and perhaps the prince will show mercy. Soren had abandoned her, cast her aside, left her to rot. And now he wanted to own her again, to rewrite her existence as if she had never defied the fate he had written for her. The thought made her stomach twist with something cold and sharp. She had been taught, from the moment she could walk, that her worth was measured in her perfection. That beauty was power, that she was nothing without it. And when she had lost it, she had lost everything, her title, her home, her place in the Empire. But Soren had made a mistake. He had left her alive. Footsteps sounded behind her, and she turned to see Caden leaning against the doorframe. His usual ease was still there, but his eyes were sharper, watchful. He had been waiting for her to speak, to tell him what came next. "They will come," she said quietly. Caden nodded, stepping forward until he stood beside her. "Yeah." She inhaled, slow and steady, the cold air filling her lungs. "And if I run, they will chase me forever." Caden didn't argue. Didn't try to tell her that she could disappear if she wanted to. They both knew it wasn't true. As long as she existed, she was a threat to Soren. "Then what's the move?" he asked. Valara turned from the balcony, her golden eyes no longer clouded with doubt. "We go to them first." The Zilithian warship Eidolon hovered above Haven's Reach, its sleek silver hull cutting through the darkness like a predator lying in wait. It had arrived only hours after the emissary's transmission, its crew waiting for her surrender. Valara had no intention of surrendering. Caden walked beside her as they entered the private docking bay, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on them. They had requested an audience, and Soren had granted it, because he believed, even now, that she was still his to control. The moment they stepped aboard, she felt it. The cold sterility of the Empire, the perfection of everything carefully arranged, as if disorder itself was a sin. 2 royal guards escorted them through the corridors, their armor gleaming under the soft, artificial lights. They did not acknowledge her, did not even glance in her direction. She had been erased. That would change. The throne room aboard the Eidolon was smaller than the one in the capital, but it held the same presence, a raised platform where Soren sat, his figure adorned in deep royal blue, his golden eyes calculating as they met hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Soren leaned back, his lips curling into something almost amused. "You're alive?" Valara stopped at the base of the platform, her posture straight, unyielding. Disappointed? His expression remained unreadable, but his fingers tapped once against the armrest. "I sent men to bring you home." She laughed, and the sound was sharp, filled with something dangerous. "You never wanted me home. You wanted me buried where no one could find me." Soren exhaled, as if dealing with something tiresome. "I did what was necessary. Your condition made your presence impossible." Valara felt the rage coil in her chest, but she did not let it show. "My condition?" She took a slow step forward. "Say it, Soren. Say what you did to me." Soren's jaw tightened, but he did not answer. Caden, who had remained silent, finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost too casual. "See, this is the problem with men like you. You think the past stays buried just because you will it to." He tilted his head slightly, watching Soren with open disdain, but here she is, standing, speaking, existing. Soren's gaze flickered to him then, as if only just noticing his presence. A human, his lips curled in distaste. "Is this what you have fallen to, Valara?" Valara did not look away. "No," she said. "This is what I have risen to." The court murmured. Some shifted uncomfortably. They had not expected this. They had expected a broken woman, a plea for reinstatement, a desperate attempt to return to what was lost. Instead, they had found a queen without a throne who did not need one to rule. Soren's fingers tightened on the armrest. For the first time she saw something behind his golden eyes, uncertainty. "You think you have won something here," he said quietly. Valara tilted her head. "No. I think I have taken something from you." The murmurs grew. Caden smiled slightly, crossing his arms. "Sounds about right." Soren stood abruptly, his robes sweeping the platform as he descended toward her. The guards at his side did not move. They did not know what this was yet. For a moment, she thought he would strike her. Then, he stopped just short of her, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "If you leave now," he murmured, "I will let you disappear. No one will chase you. No one will remember your name." Valara's lips parted into a slow, sharp smile. "That's what terrifies you, isn't it?" she whispered. "That they will remember me." She turned without another word. And this time, she was the one to leave him behind. The silence in the throne room was deafening as Valara walked away. The whispers behind her grew louder, murmurs of uncertainty, of shock. No one had ever defied Prince Soren so openly before. Not without consequence. She knew what would come next. Soren's pride would not allow him to let her go so easily. Caden matched her pace as they exited the grand chamber, his expression unreadable. She could feel his eyes on her, waiting to see if she would break after what had just happened. But she did not. She was not that woman anymore. By the time they reached the docking bay, the alarm had already been raised. Guards moved to block their path, their weapons lowered but ready. The lead officer, a Zilithian warrior clad in ceremonial silver, stepped forward. "Prince Soren has not given clearance for your departure." His tone was careful, but there was tension in his stance. Even he knew the weight of what was happening. Valara met his gaze, unflinching. "Tell Soren if he wishes to stop me, he can do it himself." A hush settled over the docking bay. The challenge was clear. The officer hesitated, his golden eyes flickering with indecision. The court had just seen her stand against their ruler. If he stopped her now, what would it prove? Caden shifted beside her, murmuring just loud enough for only her to hear. "I really hope you know what you're doing," Valara smirked. "No, but neither does he." The tension stretched thick and unyielding, until, finally, the officer stepped aside. Valara walked past him without another word. The moment she and Caden boarded the Nomad, she exhaled, her fingers clenching into the armrest of her seat as she settled in. The engines roared to life, the ship trembling as Caden piloted them off the warship. As they broke free into open space, she turned to him. "He won't let this go." Caden didn't look away from the controls. "I know." She inhaled deeply. "Then let's make sure it's his downfall, not mine." The transmission came 2 days later, a flickering, holographic message from the depths of the Zilithian court. Valara expected it to be from Soren. She was wrong. A noble woman, one of the older members of the Imperial Council, stood in the projection. Her expression was calm, but her words were laced with something dangerous. "You have made quite the spectacle," the woman said, her voice smooth as glass. "The court has begun to ask questions. Whispers are spreading through the Empire. Some have started to wonder if a prince who discards his own wife is truly fit to rule." Valara said nothing, but her pulse quickened. The noblewoman's lips curled into the barest hint of a smile. "The court will not move against him openly. Not yet. But should you wish to challenge his claim, should you wish to be more than just an exile?" She tilted her head slightly. "There are those who would stand behind you." Valara's breath caught. For years she had believed she was nothing more than a forgotten remnant of the past. Now she was a symbol. Soren had thought he was erasing her when he cast her aside. Instead, he had created something he could no longer control. Caden watched her carefully as she shut off the transmission. "You're thinking about it." Valara exhaled, leaning back in her chair. "I am?" He nodded slowly. "And?" She turned to him, her golden eyes steady, unbreakable. "I was never meant to be a prince's discarded wife." She looked out at the vast stretch of stars before them, her voice filled with quiet certainty. "I was meant to be something far greater."